Good morning, everyone.
Huh?
I'm talking on my thing, hon. Good morning, this is Stacy. We are loving my veteran, and this is walking in my shoes this morning. How is everyone this morning? Gonna have coffee, lots of coffee, and this is gonna be super confusing for me because I'm using the dual screens and to do the presentation. So um, Stephanie said move the camera to above the presentation screen, and I'm trying to read the other two, so I'm like real confused. Sorry. All right, as always, we are not paid professionals. This is just kind of what we do. So, oh, this is not working for me, y'all. God help me, I'm gonna be all confused. There we go. Um, we're not paid professionals. This is what we do here. And morning, Michelle. I'm so confused. I feel like I can't do double screens. I'm old school. So yesterday we kind of compared the brains and what went on with the brains. That there's definitely a brain injury. Today we're going to talk about the physical changes to the brain with PTSD. Tomorrow we're really going to delve into the brain with. Um, yes, I'm watching tennis, Michelle. What I need to do is, hey Michelle, why don't you do me a favor and text me the stuff that pops up in the screen so I can answer it or whatever I need to do because this is horrible. We're going to talk about the physical changes in the brain with PTSD. Tomorrow, we're really going to delve into the TBI brain and the overlap between them. And then on Thursday, we're going to talk about how we, as spouses and caregivers and partners and family, how we cope with this and treatment options on Friday that are available. There is a lot of new innovative treatments out there besides just the medication, so I want to make sure that everybody gets that as well. So now that I feel like I'm playing ping pong, let's get started. Um, Physical changes to the brain with PTSD. If you are in our group, this PowerPoint is in there in your file, so you can print it out at any time you want. You can see the slides. The new one will be up to date with everything in it. All right, so of course, the PTSD causes that brain to get stuck in that danger mode. It's commonly called that fight or flight mode. So that's what happens. Your brain gets stuck in that danger mode. And that's what happens when they trigger. They always think that they are in danger. So that fight or flight comes into play. So your brain always gets stuck in that mode when you're doing it. The amygdala, that is located in the temporal lobe, right here where we point out the temples. It's kind of way in the spot. It helps trigger the fight or flight. It's a small almond-shaped area of the brain. It's found in both the right and the left sides of the brain. And so when your body perceives danger, the amygdala sets off an alarm that warns the body that it may be in danger. It prepares your body to respond, fight or flight. It also triggers other areas of your brain to respond, and your brain decides then to stay on alert or whether or not it calms down. And it produces those hormones. So those hormones come out and they happen, and we kind of talked about this yesterday that your heart rate goes up and your sex drive goes away, and it just reshunts things to be able to do that fight or flight. But in a PTSD brain, and you can actually see it on the scans, the amygdala stays hyper aware, and so it is always more hyperactive, and that's just something that goes on in that brain with PTSD. And again, this is on PowerPoint in the group. You can download it and look at the slides. The mid anterior cingulate cortex. That's kind of like a really weird place, but that's the middle part of the brain. It is the left. It is literally sits, again, we got our little amygdala here. It sits back here. It reduces pain when the body has an initial pain response. It's what causes your body not to feel severe pain following an accident. Okay, so that also happens. A lot of times it's called the MCC, um, that part of your body. So what happens is that when that initial fight or flight comes in, it is the part that you just don't feel pain immediately. And so, like if you break a bone, you know, a lot of times if you've broken a bone or you've cut yourself really bad, you don't feel that pain until your body kind of calms down. Well, that for a veteran that has PTSD is kind of, again, when the amygdala kicks in, that kicks in. And, you know, we talk about this superhuman strength almost, and that they don't realize sometimes that they're destructive, and they don't realize sometimes that hitting the wall is not what we should be doing, or because that fight or flight kicks in, and then if they hit a tree or hit a wall or do whatever, they don't feel that pain in their hand until way later. So that part of the brain also becomes super stimulated, right? And so when you kind of understand how the PTSD brain works, again, I think it's important because we try to act like, oh, this is a mental illness, this is a mental illness. This is a defect, or an injury, is a better way to put it, to the physical brain. So that's kind of important. The hippocampus. That's the part of the brain that's responsible for long-term memory. And it kind of, when you go back here, sits way back in here. During fight or flight, the hippocampus initiates the signal to the rest of the brain to get the body to calm down. In a PTSD brain, it does not work as well to get it to calm down. It is slower to respond. So that is super important that you understand that while your amygdala is kicking in and saying, I need your heart rate to go up, I need this to go up, I need that to go up, I need all this stuff to get fight or flight done, the hippocampus is what starts that signal to say, you're okay, let's calm everything down. And it works slower in a PTSD brain. That's just the way it is. So you have one area that's overstimulated and takes longer to calm down, the part that puts you in that fight or flight, and the one that makes you calm down is slower to respond. So it's kind of important to know that. Okay, you have your prefrontal cortex, which is called the PFC, and it is the cerebral cortex. It's right here, okay? It is in the very front part of the frontal lobe. It's the brain region that has been implicated in planning complex cognitive behaviors, personality, expression, decision making, and moderating social behavior. Okay, so again, when you're in a PTSD moment, remember I said about your body that blood shunts away from those issues, from pieces of your body that don't need to be worked on, like in a fight or flight mode. So like your kidneys kind of shut down or slow down. Your digestive system slows down when you're in that fight or flight because you don't need the oxygen there. The same thing happens when they're in a triggered moment, in a PTSD moment. That prefrontal cortex is in that frontal lobe is not necessarily needed at this point because they don't need planning for complex cognitive behavior. They don't need personality expression. They don't need good decision making. Their decision making at that point is fight or flight. That's it. And moderating social behavior. They don't need to say, if you get out of my face, or I'm going to beat the hell out of you, please. Okay, that isn't what happens. So that part of the brain, when they're in that space, is also a little slower to respond. Right? So now it kind of will go into making sense when you're like, they're in a mode and this is not normal. How many times have we gone to the store and something trigger them and their social behavior skills go out the window? Right? They just completely and totally go out the window. And we see that happen all the time. Hang on, I'm going to turn my head for just a second, y'all. And so I just had to read some of the things and make sure we were on track so everybody wasn't lost here, because I can't do both again. So that's what that does. All right, so what happens to the PTSD brain? Okay? Your amygdala gets hyperactive. Your hippocampus is hypoactive, slow. The right inferior frontal part goes down, your prefrontal cortex goes down, and your orbital cortex goes down. And when you understand what those do, it's going to make sense why the behavior is the way it is. It doesn't mean that it's excusable all the time, because there are ways they can learn to cope and deal with. But this is, for lack of a better word, your brain is like the supercomputer. Okay? It isn't like it is what just does and sends signals back and forth that tell you to do this or do that. And like when we click on the thing in the little tab when we're in Explorer, it just automatically opens the page. Well, that's what kind of happens in your brain. Something sets it off and it just kind of goes there. So when you understand that their brain is doing this, not necessarily them. And I'm not saying that this is all the time, because I think, like we've explained before, that there are times we have all allowed PTSD to dominate our lives because it's just easier sometimes. And when you understand what is happening to the brain in that PTSD trigger moment, this makes sense. PTSD comes from repeated trauma. Like when the brain is exposed to trauma or traumatic events over and over, the amygdala becomes hyperactive and cannot shut down effectively. It's caused by various factors. It has like the multiple traumatic events. You all understand when we're talking about when they go through this, they've had multiple traumatic events. I have PTSD. My PTSD is extremely different from Carl's, and you will find that veteran to veteran and person to person, we all respond to PTSD differently. You can have PTSD from a sexual thing that has happened, a sexual assault that has happened in your life. You can have PTSD from watching somebody die. You can have PTSD from watching your house burn. That is a single traumatic event that happens to us, to most people, but a combat veteran has multiple traumatic events that kind of stack up. It's an emotional event that was forced to be suppressed without having time to deal with it. Okay, so here you are, your buddy's next to you, he gets shot. You don't have time to love him, grieve him, and go, oh my God, you've got to go deal with the next thing before you and the rest of your buddies become casualties. So you don't even have time to process it at all in your head. Zero processing. There's no downtime in their head. Traumatic events that resulted in death, injury, or destruction. We all know that most of our veterans have seen that. They also have survivor's guilt, which is coming up next. When you blame yourself for the death or injury to others, if you are not at a bad situation, remember, our veterans feel like they're brothers in arms, and so if they were not at a certain place and they realized that a whole nother group got injured or killed, they were like, well, I should have been there. It should have been on me. We're finding more and more PTSD is coming in survivor's guilt form from people who were stationed stateside. And they're like, I fix whatever to send to them. I did whatever to send overseas for them. And I wasn't there. I've been trained. How come I wasn't there? And they are seeing the horror, but they're not being part of it. So again, they have PTSD from that. And a lot of people are like, I remember Jeremy saying that most of his PTSD came from training related issues, training related stuff. And he was in a support group, and there were obviously veterans there that had been in theater multiple times. And the one guy looked at Jeremy and says, you don't deserve to have PTSD. And Jeremy looked back and said, nobody does. So I think that that's, morning sunny, I think that that's part of what we see in that whole PTSD brain that goes on. The role of the amygdala during that non-fight or flight moments, okay? When you're not in that moment, sex, it either gets you wants to desire too much or not enough. It's the assessment of threat-related stimuli. So um, it's always looking. So that amygdala, the way it works is it's always looking for threats. Always. Now remember, their amygdala is hyperactive. So everything becomes this passion with looking for the stress. They assess what in the environment is considered a danger. I know that when we go to Walmart, Carl done looked at every camera on the thing. He knows every entrance, every exit, where he could get me to a safe place. He knows all of that. They have fear conditioning that comes with this. It just kind of, sorry, I'm going to flip back and forth. Fear conditioning comes with this, so they're kind of always in that state of fear that something could happen. Formation and storage of emotional memories. This is where we're going to just talk about this briefly, and I'll explain it more when we get into treatment. The formation and storage of emotional memories, they stay there. The memories you have that are not emotional go to some other file cabinet drawer um, in your brain. Ones that have emotional memories kind of stay stuck in the amygdala. So the ART, or art therapy, is based on creating a different outcome, a different feeling, and so that memory does not become emotional, and therefore it can move from the amygdala and go somewhere else, so it no longer becomes a trigger, which is incredible in how that works. So again, think of your brain as a supercomputer. So you can go from there. Let's see what else. The prefrontal cortex during the non-fight or flight moments, they do emotional regulation. They're the things that when they're not in that fight or flight, they can be loving. They initiate voluntary conscious behaviors. They regulate their attention. It helps with their decision making, interpreting emotions, and it does allow them to have deep sleep. So how often do we say, I don't get it, because he's not always like this. You know, when we have this PTSD moment, and then just about the time we are done with the PTSD moment, and we think that we are done with the relationship, here he comes back in. He is loving, he's kind, he's paying attention, he's making good decisions. He can almost pick up on your emotions and love you, and they tend to sleep better. How often do we see that happen? That is what the prefrontal cortex does under normal circumstances. But when you're in that fight or flight, it just was like, we don't need you right now, so we're going to just kind of shut you off for reduced power to you, and we're going to deal with this. So that's how come you see that swing in the pendulum. You see the swing in the pendulum because when they're not triggered, they are the kindest, most loving, amazing people. But when they get in that mode, they're not, and it won't change. And when we've let, both of us, both people do it, PTSD control our life without setting those boundaries, it's easier just to stay in that fight or flight mode than to switch back and have that emotional regulation and all those things that make us love them in the very beginning. So we have to understand that. It is definitely physical changes to the brain. Those physical changes are so often mistaken for mental illnesses. And I'm going to flip back over because I'm done with that part. So y'all just bear with me in my little weird camera here because I just can't stand that any longer. Thank you. Now I feel normal. Okay. So it is truly physical changes that go on in the brain. And so for us, it's like, okay, well, you know, now that we have them and we know that they're there, how do we navigate through those? You know, we understand, I think that first of all, understanding that it is a physical change, it is a change. It is a physical injury to the brain. We have been, as society and as a generation, and even our veterans are told this, and PTSD is governed by the psychological, the psychiatry people. That's who governs treatment and whatever for PTSD. They never treat it as a physical illness. And because of that stigma, because of that mindset, we have all, society as a whole, have treated it as a mental illness, not as a physical disease, not as a physical ailment, not as a physical injury. So let me ask you this. If your veteran came home, right, without an arm, and couldn't wrap his arms around you because he was missing an arm, are you going to be uptight? Okay? Are you going to be uptight if they can't physically wrap the missing arm around you? No, because it's a physical injury that we can see. The problem is this is a physical injury that people don't see. Psychiatrists don't see it. The doctors don't see it. And when we dig into the research further, which is tomorrow when we talk about the TBI, PTSD kind of overlap and combination, when they're grasping at straws when it comes to this. And they will say, the people who do this, the doctors, it's in the American Journal of Medicine, they go in and say, we're behind the times. And I've said that so many times about the VA's treatment. They weren't prepared for the quantity that came in. Okay? They weren't prepared for that. And they should have been, but the difference is that in the Vietnam era, those veterans were already hated by Americans, by most Americans. They were spat on when they got home. They were talked down to. They weren't proud to be a Vietnam veteran. It just didn't happen that way, right? So it is important that you understand that era, that came about being. So that was there. And so, of course, they're not going to admit that they're having trouble sleeping and that they're hallucinating and they're having night sweats and they're having bad dreams and they're having all this because they already felt so discouraged and nobody wanted them there. And all of these things were a sign of a mental illness. And most of the Vietnam era veterans remember sanitariums. They remember that. You sent them off to the crazy place. I mean, that's the way it was. In 1980s, late 80s, early 80s, I took my friend's mother with her who had horrible bipolar schizophrenia, and we took her to the state mental hospital, and they came and got her in a straitjacket. So I think the quantity was there. The admitting that there was a problem was not, and I think we still have that problem with admitting that there's a problem, but there's so many. And because there's so many, we're funneling through with the only treatment we know, and even the doctors are now saying, the problem is we have so many people with PTSD and TBIs that we can't keep up, and we're not able to do the research we need to do to get them the treatment because we don't understand the physical changes in the brain. Now, this is coming from doctors at Mayo, and this is coming from doctors at Cleveland Clinic, and this is coming from doctors at Cedars-Sinai, and those are very reputable doctors at this point. And for them to say, we don't know enough about it yet. So I think that is a huge role in what we're missing, and that we mistake it as a mental illness. Again, let me reiterate this because I think this is crucial, okay? I think it is crucial that we understand we all, veterans and us, tend to allow PTSD to control our lives, because we are not told that it's a brain injury and how to deal with the brain injury. So therefore, out of habit, it controls our lives. Nobody wants to confront the explosions. Why would you want to trigger an explosion? No, we don't want to do that. But the bottom line is that explosion's going to happen regardless, because it is an injury to their brain. So it doesn't mean that you can't have normal conversations the rest of the time. And that's where we have to get that balance. And I think that's where, as spouses and caregivers, we get very frustrated. We get very frustrated. So often they say, we have PTSD. We do. If your veteran is suffering from a TBI, you have that as well, because you have taken on that role. In Nakia's situation, she may not physically have Richard's illnesses, but she lives with them every single day. So yes, she has taken that on, and yes, we get tired, and yes, this is hard, and yes, we don't know how to navigate it, but they go in and they try to treat and treat and treat the veteran, or treat and treat and treat somebody else, and they look at us and they say, stop, we don't need you. You do need me. You do need me. But until we understand the illness, and let's start looking at it like an injury, until we start looking at the injury to the brain as an injury and not as a mental condition, we can get through that. Because Michelle and I were talking about this. I know I mentioned it briefly. I had an incredible conversation. Cannot wait to get into some of the treatments. I had an incredible conversation with the PTSD clinic at Emory University. It is amazing. They literally help treat the family. The TBI thing through Shepherds, which that's what they do, is their spine and neuro. They literally bring the family in for treatment to learn everything about the disease, everything about the illness, and how to help reprogram, because you can reprogram. We see people with significant brain injuries have those cortex reprogrammed to help them. It doesn't mean they'll be 100% like they were before, but they can do it, and we can too. And I'm not saying our life is going to be perfect, but learning everything we can learn, and learning. When I learned this section, when I learned about the PTSD brain, and when I understood what it did, okay, I was like, whoa, the light is on now. The light is on now. Because I understood it was a physical thing and not just him being an ass. Sorry. You know I'm blind. I have no filter. It's not just him being that. There's physical changes. And by empowering me to know that there were physical changes that went on in that brain, that there were physical stuff that was going on, and it was real, and it wasn't some made up thing that wasn't tangible. It mentioned, yeah, when you mention mental to a vet instead of an injury, the veteran automatically shuts down. You know, we are trying so diligently to get our veterans help, and we know they need it. But when you go in and say, I need you to go see the shrink today, it's a mental issue. Instead of taking the hard facts and putting them in front of them and saying, what you have is a brain injury, and we're going to overcome the brain injury. And we're going to learn to navigate the brain injury. And this is an injury you got as a result of being in combat, or that you got as a result of experiencing a traumatic event. When that happens, and the whole mindset of society and the country happens, our veterans are going to be better than they ever were before. And we're going to be able to have better relationships than we've ever had before, because we've got to treat it exactly for what it is. Me and one of the guys from 22 No More, I'm telling you, until this country, and they are joining on this bandwagon with us, until this country changes the way that we view this, we are going to continue to have this number of veterans committing suicide. I don't care how much money you put out at Prevents. I don't care how many times you tell people to reach out. I don't care what's going on. I mean, I think it's all wonderful, and it is amazing, and they are doing amazing jobs, and without them that number would be astronomically higher. But until we face the facts that it is what it is, we are still going to have veterans killing themselves. PTSD makes you 25% more likely. TBI is higher than that. That's the reality. The number one cause of death from a TBI is not a motor vehicle accident. It is suicide. That should scare the shit out of everybody. And instead of looking at the statistic, we need to be in front of somebody's face and saying, what the hell, people? What the hell? Number one cause of death from a traumatic brain injury is not a car wreck. It is suicide. That should scare you. But you know why it doesn't? Because the stigma is here. The largest percentage of the population that suffers from TBIs and PTSD are veterans. And why? Because they're disposable. And they are crazy veterans, and nobody's going to listen to them. And that is what it is, and that is why it's not at the forefront. And yes, Michelle, family and caretakers must get involved, and we must continue to fight for a change, but we also must protect ourselves and have our own boundaries, and we do have to break the stigma, and it takes stuff like this, putting it in black and white, looking at your brain, doing the research, and understanding. Because I'm telling you, when I learned this, my whole approach to Carl was different. Whole approach was different. It's totally different, because there's a big difference in physical injury to the brain and being batshit crazy. And I hate that word. So, now that I've been on my little soapbox, because I've been on them a lot lately, Carl just laughs at me and says, what are you worked up about now? This is it. This is it. This is it. This week, this is it. This week, it is about these issues. It is about letting us learn. And we cannot give a blanketed excuses for any and all behavior that has not an iota to do with PTSD. And you do, because we enable. We enable. Being an advocate is one thing. Being an enabler is something else. And we have to learn to separate them, Nakia. And you are right. It's hard. It's hard to set your boundaries because, oh, he has PT. You know, I go back to my grandparents, and I know we're running late. When my granddaddy lost his leg, my grandmother could have said, oh, Lucas, you don't have to do anything. Just sit right there. And he could have allowed that to happen, and she could have done that, and he would have spent his whole life sitting in a wheelchair. Instead, he had his leg amputated November the 1st, and January the 2nd of that next year, November to January, he was in a blacksmith shop making crab, scallop, and oyster dredges on one leg and crutches, and never sat down until he retired in his late 60s. Did it for 40 years. But she could have enabled, and she didn't. And they could have together used the loss of the limb as an excuse, and they didn't. So that's the mindset we have to get in when we go forward. All right, I could talk on this all day. I have lots to talk about. So the rest of this week, we are going to tie up tomorrow some real key factors and some myths that's going to make a lot of you feel better, especially when it comes to dementia and Alzheimer's and TBI. and the correlation from that may or not be realistic. When we get into that, we're going to talk about truly what happened. And then Thursday, we're going to talk about us, how we navigate through these amazing struggles that we go through. And Friday, we are going to talk about some of the state-of-the-art treatment that treat the injuries, and not necessarily the mental aspect, that are available. And a lot of this stuff, y'all, is available on grants. So it costs nothing out of pocket. And again, remember, PTSD, TBI they are individual to the person. We are not paid to be the counselor. We are not paid therapists. We can't recommend a treatment. I can put it out there. You can research it, see if it's right for you and your veteran. And the one thing I will absolutely encourage everybody as we go through this series is, if you do your own research and you find that a certain medication that your veteran is on is not something that you feel like they should be on, absolutely do not just stop it cold turkey. You must confer with a physician and start getting off of them slowly. SSRIs, those kind of medications cannot be stopped cold turkey. You need to wean off of them, so please seek the advice of your doctor. Now, they say, oh, they need it. You guys as advocates and the patient can say, I'm not taking it anymore. Tell me how to wean off of it. And they can do that, but you cannot do it without a doctor's advice. Okay, I'm just putting that out there. So again, I'm Stacy. This is Walking in My Shoes. We are loving my veteran. We have so much going on. What else is there that we have to talk about, Michelle? We got a lot going on. We'll just keep working through this. Y'all have a blessed day, and I hope this made some sense to you. And I will see y'all tomorrow. Bye.